My phone buzzed in this courthouse hallway. Unknown number. I glanced at the screen and my blood turned to ice. Winter Lantern, Blue Harbor. 4 words. That's all it took to detonate my entire world. The message came exactly 30 seconds after Judge Vance gavelled down the 5th postponement of my mother's inheritance case. 30 seconds. Someone had been watching. Someone knew exactly what those words meant. Someone wanted me to know they knew. 20 feet away, my father, Leonard Sterling, adjusted his Rolex, that trademark smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The same contemptuous expression I'd seen the day he walked out on us 15 years ago. The same one he'd worn at Mom's funeral 8 months earlier. He thought this was over, thought he'd buried her secrets along with her body, thought a dead woman couldn't fight back. He was wrong. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. The fluorescent lights overhead suddenly felt too bright, the marble floors too cold, the air too thin. Winter Lantern. Those were Mom's authentication codes, codes that shouldn't exist anymore, codes that proved everything in her hidden journal was real. The surveillance, the cover-ups, the death they'd called an accident, all of it real. All of it documented, all of it about to explode. Leonard caught me staring and raised his eyebrows in mock concern the way a predator might pause before striking. That look said everything. He knew I'd found something. He just didn't know how much. Not yet. But he was about to find out. If you want to hear how I brought down a corrupt judge and exposed my father's darkest secrets, hit that like button and subscribe because this story gets wild. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. 8 months before that text message, I stood in the rain outside St. Mary's Hospital watching through the window as my mother took her last breath. I wasn't in the room. I'd stepped out to take a call from work, a client emergency that seemed important at the time. When I rushed back 3 minutes later, she was gone. That guilt would haunt me for months, the 3 minutes I'd chosen work over my dying mother. But I didn't know then that she'd left me something far more important than a goodbye. She'd left me weapons. The funeral was small. Mom didn't have many friends in Portland. After the divorce 15 years ago, she'd become increasingly isolated, spending her days in that quiet house on Hawthorne Street, tending her rose garden and watching old movies. I'd thought it was depression, the aftermath of a brutal separation that left her financially devastated. Looking back now, I realize it was strategy. She was documenting, planning, and waiting. Leonard didn't attend the funeral. He sent flowers, expensive ones, with a card that read, "Condolences on your loss." Not our loss, not my former wife. Just clinical, distant politeness. Chloe Ruiz stood beside me at the graveside, her hand on my shoulder. We'd been friends since law school, and she'd recently started her own practice focusing on family law. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, lying. I wasn't okay. I was drowning in student loans from law school, barely making rent on my public defender's salary, and now facing the prospect of settling my mother's estate alone. The first sign that things wouldn't be simple came 3 days later. I was at Mom's house going through the painful process of sorting her belongings when a courier arrived with legal documents. Leonard was challenging the will, not just filing a claim, but actively contesting Mom's mental competency when she'd drafted it 6 months before her death. I called Chloe immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. She came over within an hour, read through the petition with growing disbelief. "This is insane, Breyer. Your mother had a notarized will witnessed by 2 people and her doctor had certified her mental capacity in writing. What's he claiming?" I scanned the document feeling sick. He says she had early-stage dementia, that she was confused, easily influenced, not capable of making sound decisions about her assets. Chloe's eyes narrowed. "He's claiming you manipulated her." The accusation burned like acid. I'd visited Mom twice a week during her illness, taken her to appointments, held her hand through chemotherapy, sat with her through the night, terrors that came with the pain medication. The idea that I'd used that intimacy to steal from her was vile, and Leonard knew it was vile. That was why he was saying it. He wanted me to fold under the emotional weight of such an ugly claim. But there was something else in the petition that caught Chloe's attention. He's specifically demanding the return of certain personal property he claims was his. Look at item 7, family heirlooms and personal effects currently in the deceased's possession. He's not just after money. He wants specific things from her house. I thought about Mom's sparse belongings. She didn't have much. Some furniture kitchen items, photo albums, and that old oak trunk she'd bought at an estate sale years ago. What family heirlooms? My parents weren't wealthy. Mom kept costume jewelry and old books. Chloe made notes in her precise handwriting. We need to catalog everything in the house, document it all. If he's claiming specific items belong to him, we need proof of what's actually there. She looked up at me, her expression serious. Briar, is there anything in that house that might be valuable? Anything he might want badly enough to go through all this? I shook my head slowly, but doubt crept in. Why would Leonard, a partner at one of Portland's most prestigious law firms, bother fighting over a modest estate worth maybe $85,000 total? His billable rate was probably $600 an hour. This didn't make financial sense unless something else was driving him. The first court date arrived with nauseating speed. I'd never been on this side of a courtroom before. As a public defender, I was used to standing beside my clients arguing for their rights, fighting against a system that often seemed designed to crush poor people. Now I was the one being judged, my relationship with my mother being picked apart by lawyers who'd never met her. Leonard's attorney, a sharp-faced man named Marcus Delaney, painted a picture of Elena Foster as a confused, declining woman who'd been isolated and vulnerable to influence. He suggested I'd used my legal training to manipulate her, had drafted the will myself, despite the fact that a licensed attorney had handled it. Judge Elias Vance presided with an air of boredom that immediately set me on edge. He was in his early 60s, gray-haired and distinguished-looking, the kind of judge who seemed more interested in his golf schedule than justice. When Chloe presented our evidence medical records showing Mom had been cognitively sharp until her final week's testimony from her oncologist about her mental clarity notarized statements from the will's witnesses, Vance barely looked at the documents. He scheduled another hearing for 2 weeks out, citing the need to review complex medical terminology. Chloe and I exchanged glances. There was nothing complex about what we'd submitted. Outside the courthouse, I confronted Leonard for the first time in 5 years. He was standing by his Mercedes checking his phone with that same distracted arrogance I remembered from childhood. "We need to talk," I said. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "There's nothing to discuss until the court makes its ruling. You're really going to do this?" I stepped closer, anger overriding my usual conflict avoidance. "You're going to stand in front of a judge and claim Mom wasn't capable of deciding who gets her own belongings after everything you put her through?" Leonard's face hardened. "Your mother made many poor decisions during our marriage and after. I'm ensuring that her final wishes were actually her wishes and not the product of outside influence." The implication was clear. I was the outside influence. "You took everything from her in the divorce," I said, my voice shaking. "The house, the savings, even her confidence. She spent 15 years rebuilding from nothing, and now you want to take what little she managed to save." He opened his car door. "See you at the next hearing, Briar." He drove away, leaving me standing in the courthouse parking lot feeling like that 8-year-old girl again, watching her father walk out of her life without looking back. The weeks between hearings blurred together. I threw myself into work, taking extra cases, staying late at the office to avoid going home to my empty apartment. My supervisor, Liam Chin, noticed. "You're burning out," he said one evening, finding me still at my desk at 9 p.m. "This thing with your mom's estate, it's eating you alive." "I know," I admitted, "but I can't let him win Liam. If I let him take this, it means everything Mom went through meant nothing." He sat on the edge of my desk. "Your mother's life meant something because of how she lived it, not because of what she left behind. Don't lose yourself in this fight." But I was already lost in it. The second hearing came and went with another postponement. Judge Vance claimed he needed expert testimony about estate law and elder care. Chloe filed objections that were summarily dismissed. The third hearing never even started. Vance had a scheduling conflict. By the fourth hearing, I was ready to scream. Chloe put a hand on my arm as we waited for Vance to take the bench. "He's dragging this out on purpose. I've done some research on his other cases. He has a pattern of delays in anything involving estate disputes where one party has military background. My mother had served in the Air Force, but I'd never thought it relevant to this case." Why would military service matter in probate court? That fourth hearing was when everything started unraveling, though I didn't realize it at the time. Vance granted another continuance, but his reasoning was bizarre. He wanted documentation of my mother's military service records, claiming they might shed light on her mental state. Chloe objected strenuously. Your Honor, the petitioner hasn't established any connection between military service 3 decades ago and current testamentary capacity. This is a fishing expedition. Vance overruled her with a wave of his hand. I'll determine what's relevant, counsel. We'll reconvene when those records are produced. In the hallway, after I finally broke down, "This is never going to end," I told Chloe. "He's going to keep finding excuses until I can't afford to fight anymore, or I just give up from exhaustion." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Breyer. "I think something else is going on here. Vance and your father, they served around the same time. I saw them talking before the hearing, really talking, not just courtroom pleasantries. I'm going to look into their connection. If they know each other beyond this case, it could be grounds for recusal." I drove to my mother's house that evening, needing to be surrounded by her things to remember why I was fighting. The house still smelled like her lavender lotion and Earl Grey tea. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching her furniture, her books, her carefully organized kitchen. Everything in its place. Everything documented and labeled. Even in death, she was organized. It was while I was standing in her bedroom, looking at the old oak trunk at the foot of her bed, that my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was spam, but something made me pick up. "Is this Breyer Thorne?" The voice was female, cold and professional. "Who is this?" I asked. "Someone who knew your mother. Someone who needs to speak with you about what's really at stake in your court case. Can you meet me tomorrow?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" "Meet me at Powell's Books, 2 p.m. Come alone. The Blue Room. Don't tell anyone who you're meeting or why." The line went dead. I stood there holding my phone, my heart racing. Every instinct told me this was crazy, potentially dangerous, definitely suspicious. But another part of me, the part that had been feeling like this whole court case was orchestrated theater hiding some deeper truth, that part wanted answers. I texted Chloe. "Had a weird call. Meeting someone tomorrow at Powell's. If you don't hear from me by 4, come looking." Her response was immediate. "Absolutely not. Don't go alone." But I was going. I had to know what this was about. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed at Mom's house, staring at the ceiling, turning over everything that had happened since her death. The aggressive will challenge, the unusual delays, Vance's bizarre focus on military records, Leonard's determination to get specific items from the house. It didn't fit together unless there was a missing piece, something I didn't know about. I got up around 3 a.m. and went back to her bedroom. The trunk sat there silent and mysterious. Always look under the roses where real beauty hides. Mom had said that phrase countless times during my childhood. I'd thought it was just something she said while gardening. Now I wondered if it meant something else. I opened the trunk carefully. Inside were blankets, old quilts. Mom had made some sweaters she'd knitted. I lifted them out gently, feeling along the bottom. The fabric lining was yellowed with age, decorated with faded rose patterns. I pressed along the edges, and that's when I felt it. A slight give in the bottom left corner. My fingers found a small wooden catch barely visible under the fabric. I pressed it and heard a soft click, a false bottom. The compartment was shallow, maybe 2 inches deep, but it was packed with items. Photographs, a leather journal, a manila envelope thick with papers, and a small amber-colored notebook with gold edging. The photographs made my breath catch. Leonard and another man in military uniforms, younger versions of themselves, standing in front of what looked like surveillance equipment. Banks of recording devices, headphones, technical equipment I didn't recognize. The other man took me a moment to place, then I realized with shock. It was Judge Vance. 30 years younger, but unmistakably him. My hands shook as I picked up the leather journal. My mother's handwriting filled the pages, but these weren't diary entries about her feelings or daily life. These were operational logs, dates and times, and coded abbreviations, technical descriptions of surveillance activities. Mission Designator Blue Harbor. Primary targets, civilian political figures. Authorization level questionable. Legal review insufficient. I read for hours as dawn broke outside, unable to stop, unable to look away from what my mother had documented. She'd been part of a signals intelligence unit at Beale Air Force Base in California during the mid-90s. But this wasn't routine military intelligence work. According to her meticulous notes, the unit had been conducting domestic surveillance on American citizens, including elected officials and political activists. Leonard and Vance had been part of the operation. My mother had been the cryptographic analyst who processed the intercepted communications. The entries grew more disturbing as I read. June 12, 1996. LNA directing surveillance of Senator Gardner's adult daughter. Intercepting her phone calls, email, personal communications. Purpose given as leverage for upcoming defense appropriations vote. This exceeds any legitimate national security rationale. Flagged concerns to Major Monroe, told to maintain operational security. I flipped pages, my horror growing. August 4, 1996. Civilian activist Jamie Winters issued public statement questioning military intelligence domestic operations. Received credible information from source within. LNA and EV expressed concern about exposure. August 5, 1996. Jamie Winters dead in single car accident on Highway 5. Vehicle left roadway at high speed, no apparent cause. Official ruling accidental. Timing impossible to ignore. My mother had believed Winters' death wasn't an accident. She'd believed the men she worked with, including my father, had something to do with it, and she'd kept documenting. December 18, 1996. LNA received promotion to captain following Gardner operation's success. Senator voted in favor of expanded intelligence budget after private meeting with LNA's commanding officer. Connection undeniable. My mother's courage overwhelmed me. She'd documented potential crimes, possible murder, systematic abuse of government power, all while serving alongside the perpetrators, all while married to one of them. The journal entries continued through her pregnancy with me through my early childhood. She'd been gathering evidence while living with Leonard, sleeping beside him, pretending everything was normal. April 3, 1998. Cannot continue in this position. Have made secure copies of all documentation. Distributed to trusted contacts with instructions for release if anything happens to me. Will complete service term and separate. Must protect B above all else. She'd left the military shortly after left my father a few years later. The divorce made sense now in a horrible way. She hadn't left because their marriage was unhappy. She'd left because staying meant living with someone she knew was capable of terrible things. The manila envelope contained photocopies of official documents. Surveillance logs with target names redacted but dates and operation codes visible. Communication transcripts, the content blacked out but headers showing they were intercepted civilian communications. Authorizations with signatures, including one that looked like Leonard's. Everything was copies. Nothing original, but that made sense. Mom had hidden the originals somewhere else, kept copies here as insurance. The small amber notebook turned out to be an authentication log showing she'd verified certain encrypted messages during Blue Harbor operations. On the inside cover, written in faded ink, was the phrase, "Winter Lantern." I had no idea what it meant, but clearly it was important. I sat on my mother's bedroom floor as morning light filled the room, surrounded by evidence of crimes committed decades ago, finally understanding why Leonard was fighting so hard for a modest estate. He wasn't after money. He was after this trunk. He needed to destroy this evidence before it could surface. Somehow he'd learned about it or suspected Mom had kept records, and her death had started a clock ticking. If I went through her belongings as part of settling the estate, I might find what she'd hidden. He had to get control of her property first, had to be the one going through her things, making sure nothing incriminating survived her. But there was still something missing. How did he know Mom had been so careful? She'd kept this hidden for decades. What had changed, I thought about the timing. She'd drafted her will 6 months before her death, right after her cancer diagnosis. She must have known she was running out of time. Maybe she'd reached out to someone, tried to ensure the evidence would be protected after she was gone. Maybe that had tipped off Leonard somehow. Or maybe Judge Vance, who clearly knew about Blue Harbor, who was now presiding over this estate case. He was helping Leonard control the narrative, delay the proceedings, keep everything locked down until they could locate and destroy the evidence. My phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. Hope you're still planning to meet today. 2 p.m. Blue Room. Don't be late. I stared at the message. Whoever had called me last night knew about this. Knew about Blue Harbor, knew about my mother's documentation, knew I needed answers. But who? And could I trust them? I looked at the photographs spread around me at Leonard's young, smiling face, standing next to surveillance equipment that had been used to spy on American citizens, at Judge Vance beside him, part of the same operation, now using his position on the bench to help cover it up. I had to know more. I had to meet this person. I spent the morning carefully photographing every page of the journal, every document in the envelope, every photo. I uploaded them to an encrypted cloud storage account Chloe had set up for sensitive case files. If anything happened to me, if the originals were destroyed, at least the evidence would survive digitally. Then I put everything back in the false bottom compartment, closed the trunk, and tried to make myself presentable. I looked exhausted, which made sense given I'd been up all night unraveling a 30-year-old conspiracy. Powell's Books was Portland's famous independent bookstore, occupying an entire city block of downtown. The Blue Room was on the 3rd floor, dedicated to science fiction and fantasy. I arrived 15 minutes early, positioning myself where I could watch people coming up the stairs. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman appeared. She was maybe 45, fit and alert in the way that suggested military or law enforcement background, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. She scanned the room professionally before her eyes landed on me. She approached with confidence. "Briar Thorne." I nodded. "Who are you?" She sat down across from me, keeping her voice low. "You can call me Agent Raven. It's not my real name, but it's what your mother knew me as. She and I served together at Beale. Signal Intelligence Operation Blue Harbor." I felt my chest tighten. "You were there. You know what they did." Agent Raven nodded slowly. "I know what we all did, but some of us had limits. Your mother did. She documented abuses, tried to work through proper channels, got shut down. She left the service and I thought she'd let it go. Then 6 months ago, she reached out. Said she had copies of everything, wanted to make sure they'd be preserved if anything happened to her. She was smart. She knew the cancer was terminal. Did she tell my father she had evidence, I asked. Did that trigger all this? Agent Raven shook her head. She told me. I told Major Caleb Monroe, her former commanding officer, one of the few people involved in Blue Harbor who had ethical qualms about what was happening. Monroe must have mentioned it to someone and word got back to your father and Judge Vance. They panicked. Elena was supposed to die quietly, her secrets buried with her. Instead, she'd ensured her documentation would survive. Why are you telling me this now? What do you want? She pulled out the amber notebook identical to the one I'd found. Authentication codes. Winter Lantern was your mother's verification signature. Any document marked with that code was personally verified by her. She was the best cryptographic analyst I ever worked with. If she documented something you can trust, it's accurate. She paused, measuring her words. The Department of Justice has an oversight committee investigating judicial misconduct. Judge Vance is on their list for unrelated issues, but if they find out about his connection to Blue Harbor and his current involvement in your case, he's finished. Your father, too. They're desperate to keep this buried. So they're using the court system to delay until they can find and destroy the evidence, I said. Agent Raven nodded. And if delay doesn't work, there are other options. Jamie Winters died in a convenient accident. Your mother died of cancer, but cancer patients are vulnerable. Medications can be tampered with. Care can be inadequate. I felt cold fury wash over me. Are you saying my father killed my mother? Agent Raven held up her hands. I'm saying desperate people do desperate things. I don't have proof your mother's death was anything but natural. But I know she had information that powerful people want destroyed. And I know you're now standing between them and that information. What do you want me to do? I asked. Agent Raven leaned forward. Fight. Use the evidence she left you. Expose what happened. But be smart about it. They're watching you. Your lawyer's competent, but she doesn't know what she's up against. You need allies who understand the game. She slid a business card across the table. That's Major Monroe's number. He's retired now, but he'll verify everything I've told you. He can also testify about your mother's work, her competence, her integrity. And you need someone who knows how to investigate corruption. She gave me another card. Dom Gallo, private investigator, former FBI. He specializes in cases like this. Tell him I sent you. After Agent Raven left, I sat in the Blue Room for another hour trying to process everything. My mother had been a spy, essentially. She'd witnessed crimes, documented them, and then spent 30 years living in quiet fear that the people she'd exposed would come for her. And when she knew she was dying, she'd made sure I'd have the tools to finish what she started. But she'd also put me in danger. If Leonard and Vance were willing to kill to protect their secrets, I was now a target. I called Chloe from the bookstore's parking garage, speaking quickly in case someone was listening. I found something at Mom's house. Documents, evidence of crimes. Leonard and Vance were involved together decades ago in something really bad. That's why they're fighting the will. They want to find and destroy the evidence before it surfaces. Her response was immediate. Don't say anything else on the phone. Where are you? I'll come to you. We met at a coffee shop in Selwood, a neighborhood far from downtown or anywhere we might be recognized. I showed her the photos I'd taken, watched her face go pale as she read through my mother's documentation. This is incredible, she whispered. This is also incredibly dangerous. If even half of this is true, your father and Judge Vance committed serious federal crimes. Conspiracy, domestic surveillance, possibly accessory to murder. The statute of limitations has probably run on most of it, but the cover-up is ongoing. That's a crime they're committing right now. She looked up at me. You could go to the FBI with this. Let them handle it. But would they? I asked. Raven said there's already an investigation into Vance. That means someone knows something. If I go to the FBI with military intelligence documents from 30 years ago, won't I get in trouble for having classified material? Chloe considered this. Possibly. These documents should have been destroyed or remained in secured government storage. Your mother shouldn't have had them, but whistleblower protections might apply. I don't trust the system to handle this correctly, I said. The system is literally rigged right now. Judge Vance is presiding over our case while actively covering up his involvement in the crimes Mom documented. If I hand this over to federal authorities, it disappears into a bureaucratic black hole while Leonard and Vance lawyer up and make the evidence inadmissible. Chloe nodded slowly. So, what's your play? Use it to force Leonard to drop the challenge. We present just enough evidence to show we know what Blue Harbor was and his involvement in it. Make it clear that if he continues this fight, we'll make everything public. He backs off, we get the inheritance, the documents stay secure. But that's not justice, I said. That's blackmail. That's letting them get away with everything Mom documented. Chloe met my eyes steadily. Your mother lived with this knowledge for 30 years and never went public. Maybe she knew that sometimes survival means compromise. You can't bring down corrupt systems alone, Briar. Even with all this evidence, you're one person against people with money, power, and willingness to eliminate threats. I understood what she was saying, but I also felt my mother's courage flowing through me. She'd documented these crimes specifically so they wouldn't be forgotten, so someday someone could bring the truth to light. If I used her evidence just to secure my inheritance and then hid it away again, I'd be betraying everything she'd risked her life to preserve. Over the next 2 days, I met with Major Caleb Monroe and Dom Gallo. Monroe was in his 70s now, retired to Seattle, but his mind was sharp and his memories of Operation Blue Harbor were vivid. Your mother was the conscience of our unit, he told me in his living room overlooking Puget Sound. She kept pushing back, questioning orders, demanding legal reviews. I should have backed her up more strongly. When she left the service, I thought she'd moved on, learning that she'd been carrying this burden all these years. He shook his head sadly. Elena deserved so much better than what life gave her. He agreed to provide testimony about her work, her mental acuity, her character. If they want to question her competency, I'll make very clear she was one of the most intelligent, ethically grounded people I've ever known. Dom Gallo was harder to read. He was about 50, stocky and suspicious with the weary cynicism of someone who'd seen too much corruption. He listened to my story without interrupting, examined copies of the documents without comment. When I finished, he leaned back in his office chair. This is big. Bigger than you probably realize. If Blue Harbor was doing what your mother documented, there are likely other victims, other operations, a whole network of abuse that's been covered up for decades. I can investigate, find connections, build a case. But I need to know what you want, justice or safety, because you probably can't have both. I want both, I said stubbornly. I want my father and Judge Vance to face consequences for what they did, and I want to stay alive to see it happen. Gallo smiled grimly. Then we need to be very strategic. We build the case in secret document, everything establish a network of evidence and witnesses that can't be silenced by eliminating one person. We make sure that if anything happens to you, the information goes public automatically. Dead man's switch, essentially. Your enemies need to know that killing you makes things worse for them, not better. It was Gallo who discovered Joyce Reeves. She was a court clerk who'd worked with Judge Vance for 12 years, and she'd been noticing irregularities for at least half that time. Gallo found her through his former FBI contacts people who kept track of courthouse gossip. Joyce agreed to meet me at a diner in Beaverton, nervous and looking over her shoulder. "I could lose my job," she said immediately. "I could lose my pension. But what Vance is doing, it's not right." She slid a folder across the table. "These are copies of his schedule for the last 6 months. See here, these gaps every few weeks meetings not listed on his official calendar." She pointed to dates. "And here, these are the days your case was postponed. Notice a pattern." I studied the documents. On several occasions the day before a postponement in my case, Vance had a gap in his schedule lasting 1 to 2 hours. Off-the-books meetings. "And your father's name appears on visitor logs for those days," she said. "Not meeting with Vance, officially just happening to be in the courthouse. They're coordinating." She pulled out more papers. "This is Vance's financial disclosure from last year. See this entry tax preparation services valued at $4,000 provided by Sterling Legal. Your father's firm does Vance's personal taxes. That's not illegal, but it's a relationship that should have been disclosed." With Joyce's documentation, Agent Raven's testimony, Major Monroe's credibility, and Gallo's investigative work, we started building a real case. Not just against Leonard's will challenge, but against the entire corrupt system that had enabled Blue Harbor and was now trying to cover it up. Chloe coordinated everything, creating a timeline, organizing evidence, preparing legal strategies for multiple scenarios. "We're going scorched earth," she said during one of our late-night planning sessions at her office. "If they want a fight, we'll give them one they'll never forget." But Leonard was moving too. 2 weeks before the next scheduled hearing, strange things started happening. My apartment was broken into while I was at work. Nothing was stolen, but my files had been searched, papers scattered across my floor. Chloe's car was followed multiple times. She started varying her route home, checking for tails. Dom Gallo called to warn me that someone had been asking questions about his investigation, trying to find out who had hired him. "We're making them nervous," he said. "That means we're on the right track. It also means we need to be very careful." The most disturbing incident happened on a Tuesday evening. I was leaving my office late, walking to my car in the dim courthouse parking garage when a man approached me. He was in his 50s, nondescript, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without noticing. "Miss Thorne," he said pleasantly, "I need you to understand something. Your father and his associates have resources you can't imagine. Legal resources, financial resources, other kinds of resources. What you're trying to do, it's not going to work out the way you think. Drop the case. Take whatever settlement they offer. Move on with your life. This is friendly advice." I felt fear spike through me, but also anger. "Who are you?" He smiled. "Someone who's seen what happens when people don't take good advice." "Good evening, Miss Thorne." He walked away, leaving me shaking in the empty garage. I reported the incident to police, but there wasn't much they could do. No threats, no assault, just a conversation in a public place. The officer taking my report looked skeptical when I tried to explain the context. "So, you think your father hired someone to intimidate you over an inheritance dispute? Ma'am, family fights over estates get ugly, but this sounds like paranoia." I stopped trying to explain, but I called Agent Raven and her response was immediate. "Leave town for a few days. Stay somewhere they can't find you. This is escalating faster than I expected." Instead, I doubled down. I wasn't running. I was finishing this. 3 days before this next hearing, Leonard's lawyer sent a settlement offer. It came via email at 11 p.m. marked urgent. The terms were stunning. Full inheritance to me, no contest, plus an additional $200,000 from Leonard personally. In exchange, I would surrender all personal property currently in the estate, specifically including any trunk storage containers, documents, or memorabilia from the decedent's military service. Additionally, I would sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement prohibiting me from discussing any aspect of my parents' marriage divorce or my mother's military career. I read the offer 3 times, my heart pounding. $200,000. That would pay off my student loans with enough left over for a down payment on a house. I could finally have financial security instead of living paycheck to paycheck. All I had to do was give them the documents and promise to stay silent. I thought about my mother, about the choice she'd made 30 years ago to document crimes instead of just moving on. She'd chosen principle over peace. She'd chosen truth over safety. And she'd lived with that choice for 3 decades, knowing what it cost her. I called Chloe despite the late hour. They made an offer. It's a good offer financially, but they want me to surrender everything and sign an NDA. There was silence on the line. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to know why they're so desperate," I said. "What changed? Why make this offer now, right before the hearing?" Chloe was quiet for a moment. "I may have an answer. I've been monitoring court filings and news. The Justice Department's Oversight Committee investigation into Vance just got upgraded. They're looking into specific cases for signs of bias or corruption. Our case is on their review list. That's why he recused himself from his other ongoing cases this week. He knows scrutiny is coming. So they're trying to shut me up before the investigation finds our case and starts asking questions about why Vance has been delaying a straightforward probate matter," I said. "Exactly. And if you sign that NDA and accept the settlement, there's no case to investigate. Everything goes away quietly." Chloe paused. "But here's what I think you should know. I filed a motion this afternoon to have Vance recused from your case based on his relationship with Leonard. I documented the private meetings, the tax services, the pattern of delays. I submitted it directly to the presiding judge of the circuit. Even if Vance wanted to continue the case, he can't now. My motion will force a response." I felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. That's incredible. But now they know we have evidence of their connection. Now they're really going to panic. "Exactly," Chloe said. "So here's my advice, and you can take it or ignore it. We go into that hearing ready for war. We don't accept their settlement. We present everything, force it into the public record, and let the chips fall where they may. But you need to be ready for serious retaliation. These people have already demonstrated they're willing to bend every rule. We don't know how far they'll go if they're truly cornered." "I'll be ready," I said. "Tell them we reject the settlement. We're going to trial." The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep again. I lay in my apartment listening to every sound, wondering if someone was watching me planning something. Around 2 a.m., I got up and went to my computer. I drafted a long document detailing everything I knew about Operation Blue Harbor. My mother's role in documenting abuses, Leonard's and Vance's involvement, and the current cover-up attempt. I sent copies to Agent Raven, Major Monroe, Dom Gallo, Chloe, and 3 journalists I'd researched who specialized in investigating government corruption. The emails were scheduled to send automatically if I didn't log in and cancel them every 24 hours. My dead man's switch, as Gallo had suggested. If anything happened to me, the truth would come out anyway. The morning of the hearing, I woke early and dressed carefully. I chose a navy blue suit, professional and serious, the kind of outfit that said I was someone to be taken seriously. I met Chloe outside the courthouse at 8 an hour before the hearing. She had Major Monroe with her, distinguished in a crisp suit, and Agent Raven, who'd agreed to be available if needed, though she wouldn't appear in court if we could avoid it. Classified information had to be handled carefully. Dom Gallo was already inside, observing, ready to provide testimony about the intimidation attempts and the investigation. We entered the courthouse together, a united front. The hallway outside the courtroom was crowded with more people than I'd expected. I recognized several journalists tipped off somehow about today's proceedings. Leonard was already there with Delaney, both of them looking grim. Leonard's eyes met mine across the hallway, and for a moment I saw something I'd never seen before in his face. Fear. Real, genuine fear. He knew we had something. He just didn't know exactly what. The bailiff called us into the courtroom. Instead of Judge Vance, a new judge sat on the bench. Judge Maria Sandoval, according to the nameplate. She was in her 50s with sharp eyes and an air of no-nonsense competence. I'd appeared before her in criminal cases and knew her reputation. Fair but tough and tolerant of games or manipulation. This was good for us. She reviewed paperwork for a moment, then looked up. "Before we proceed with the scheduled hearing on the will challenge, I need to address a motion for recusal that was filed against Judge Vance." She looked at Chloe. "Counselor Ruiz, you filed this motion. Would you care to summarize your grounds? Chloe stood with confidence. Your Honor, we've discovered evidence of a personal and financial relationship between Judge Vance and the petitioner Leonard Sterling that should have been disclosed, and that creates an appearance of impropriety in this case. Specifically, we have documentation showing private meetings between the judge and Mr. Sterling on dates immediately preceding court-ordered delays in these proceedings. We also have evidence that Mr. Sterling's law firm provides personal tax preparation services to Judge Vance, creating a financial relationship. She handed up the folder Joyce had provided. We believe this relationship has resulted in biased rulings and procedural irregularities designed to benefit Mr. Sterling. Delaney shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is an outrageous accusation without foundation. Judge Vance and Mr. Sterling having a professional relationship doesn't prove bias. But Judge Sandoval held up her hand for silence. I've reviewed the documentation Counsel Ruiz provided. The pattern is concerning enough that Judge Vance has already recused himself from this matter and all other cases involving Mr. Sterling or his firm. The presiding judge has referred the matter to the Judicial Conduct Commission for investigation. She looked directly at Leonard. Mr. Sterling, I want to be very clear. This court will not tolerate any impropriety. We will proceed with this hearing under my supervision, and I expect complete honesty and transparency from all parties. The tension in the courtroom was electric. Delaney tried to regroup. Your Honor, in light of these developments, my client wishes to withdraw his challenge to the will and accept its terms as written. This whole matter has become unnecessarily contentious, and Mr. Sterling simply wants to move forward with dignity. Judge Sandoval looked skeptical. That's very convenient timing, counsel. But before I accept any withdrawal, I want to understand what this case has really been about. She turned to Chloe. Counsel Ruiz, you indicated you have evidence about the motivation behind this will challenge. I'd like to hear it. Chloe had been ready for this moment. Your Honor, the decedent, Elena Foster, served in the United States Air Force as a signals intelligence specialist from 1994 to 1998. During that service, she was involved in classified operations. We have testimony from her commanding officer and colleagues that Mrs. Foster documented concerning activities during those operations, activities that may have violated regulations and possibly law. She kept records of those documented concerns. We believe Mr. Sterling's challenge to this will was not actually about his daughter's alleged influence or his ex-wife's mental capacity. It was an attempt to gain control of the estate specifically to locate and destroy those historical records. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Sandoval gavelled for silence. Those are serious allegations, counsel. Do you have proof? Chloe nodded. We have testimony from Major Caleb Monroe, who commanded the unit in question. We have testimony from a former colleague of Mrs. Foster's who can verify the existence of these records. And we have copies of some of those records that demonstrate Mrs. Foster's involvement in documenting operational irregularities. She's being careful, I realized. Not revealing everything, not entering the actual Blue Harbor documentation into evidence yet, but establishing enough to make the case that Leonard's motivations were about those documents, not about the will itself. Delaney stood again. Your Honor, even if any of this were true, and we don't concede that it is, it's irrelevant to the question of testamentary capacity. Whether Mrs. Foster kept old work documents doesn't affect whether she was mentally competent when drafting her will. Actually, it does, Chloe shot back, because the medical evidence we've presented conclusively proves Mrs. Foster was mentally sharp until her final weeks. The only reason to question her capacity is if you're trying to invalidate a will that specifically left certain items to someone you don't want to have them. This was never about whether Mrs. Foster was competent. It was about controlling what her daughter inherited, specifically historical documents that Mr. Sterling wants destroyed. Judge Sandoval considered this. Mr. Sterling, I'm going to ask you directly. Was your will challenge motivated by concerns about your late ex-wife's mental state or by desire to control specific property? She left to your daughter. Leonard stood, drawing himself up with the last shreds of his dignity. Your Honor, I had legitimate concerns about the circumstances of the will's creation. My ex-wife and I had not been in contact for many years, and I was surprised by certain provisions. That's not an answer to my question, Judge Sandoval said sharply. Were you trying to gain access to specific documents or property through this challenge? Before Leonard could respond, the courtroom doors opened. Judge Elias Vance entered looking like he'd aged a decade since I'd last seen him. Your Honor, I apologize for interrupting, but I have a statement I need to make for the record. Judge Sandoval frowned but nodded. Approach Judge Vance. They conferred at the bench in whispers for several minutes. I saw Judge Sandoval's expression shift from annoyance to shock to what looked like anger. When they finished, Vance stepped back and faced the courtroom. I want to state publicly that I should have recused myself from this case from the beginning. I have a personal connection to Mr. Sterling dating back to our military service together in the 1990s. That relationship should have been disclosed, and my failure to do so was a serious lapse in judgment. He paused, seeming to gather courage. Moreover, I have been coordinating with Mr. Sterling regarding the handling of this case in ways that were inappropriate and possibly illegal. I did so because we both had concerns about certain historical matters being exposed through estate proceedings. I acknowledge that my actions constituted judicial misconduct, and I am cooperating with the Oversight Committee investigation. The courtroom exploded. Reporters were typing frantically. Spectators were whispering and gasping. Judge Sandoval gavelled repeatedly for order. When she finally got silence, she turned to Leonard with an expression of cold fury. Mr. Sterling, you colluded with a sitting judge to manipulate court proceedings in your favor. That is one of the most serious forms of corruption I can imagine. I am referring this matter to the Bar Association for immediate investigation into your conduct. She looked at Delaney. Does your client still wish to withdraw his will challenge, or shall we proceed with hearing the evidence about why he filed it in the first place? Delaney looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Your Honor, my client withdraws his challenge completely and unconditionally. We stipulate that Elena Foster was of sound mind when she drafted her will and that all provisions should be honored as written. He sat down heavily. Leonard didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead, his face gray and defeated. Judge Sandoval made it official. The challenge is dismissed. The will is admitted to probate. All assets pass to Briarthorne as designated. This matter is concluded. She banged her gavel with finality. As we filed out of the courtroom, Leonard caught my arm in the hallway. His grip was weak, almost pleading. Briar, please. Whatever you found, whatever your mother left you, don't make this public. There are things you don't understand, national security implications. I pulled my arm free. I understand perfectly. You and Vance abused your positions, violated the law, and probably got someone killed to cover it up. Mom documented all of it, and she trusted me to decide what to do with that information. His face crumpled. You'll destroy me. I looked at him, this man who'd haunted my childhood, who'd crushed my mother's spirit, who'd tried to steal even her final legacy. You destroyed yourself, Dad. You did this. All of it. Every bad choice, every crime, every cover-up, that's all on you. I walked away, surrounded by Chloe Major Monroe and Agent Raven. We left through a side exit to avoid the reporters. In Chloe's car, nobody spoke for several minutes. Finally, Major Monroe broke the silence. Your mother would be so proud of you. What you did in there took tremendous courage. I felt tears starting. All I did was not let them win. She did the hard part. She documented everything while living with one of them, working alongside them, knowing what they'd done. That took real courage. Over the following weeks, the story exploded into a major scandal. The Oversight Committee's investigation expanded dramatically once they learned about the Blue Harbor connection and the will manipulation. More victims came forward, people who'd had cases before Vance that had been decided strangely, attorneys who'd noticed irregularities but hadn't spoken up. Dom Gallo's investigation uncovered a network of favors and corruption involving multiple judges and attorneys with Leonard and Vance at the center. The Bar Association moved swiftly to suspend Leonard's license pending a full hearing. Vance announced his retirement, but that didn't stop the investigation. I went through my mother's house more carefully, cataloging everything, making sure nothing was lost or destroyed. The trunk became almost sacred to me, this ordinary piece of furniture that had held such extraordinary secrets. I found other things too. Letters my mother had written but never sent, explaining her choices, apologizing for staying silent so long. One was addressed to me. My darling Briar. If you're reading this, I'm gone and you've found what I left behind. I'm sorry for the burden I'm placing on you. I'm sorry I couldn't fight this battle myself, but I knew you'd be strong enough, brave enough to finish what I started. Don't let them make you doubt yourself. Don't let them twist this into something it's not. What Leonard and Elias did was wrong. What they're still doing is wrong. The truth matters even when it's difficult, even when it costs us something. I love you, and I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Be safe, be smart, and don't let the bastards grind you down. Love always, Mom. I cried for an hour after reading that letter. Then I got up, washed my face, and went back to work. My mother had spent 30 years carrying this burden alone. The least I could do was help bring her truth into the light. Agent Raven and I worked with journalists to carefully release information about Operation Blue Harbor without compromising truly sensitive national security matters. The stories that emerged were damning enough. Domestic surveillance beyond legal authorization, political manipulation using intelligence resources, possible involvement in Jamie Winter's death, though that remained officially unresolved. The articles sparked congressional hearings, new oversight legislation reforms to how military intelligence operations were supervised. Leonard faced multiple investigations. Bar Association criminal referral for obstruction of justice civil suits from people whose cases before Vance had been tainted. His law firm publicly severed ties with him, eager to distance themselves from the scandal. He hired expensive lawyers, fought every charge, denied everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. My mother's meticulous documentation, corroborated by Major Monroe and others, created an unassailable record. Last I heard, he was negotiating a plea deal to avoid prison time, accepting disbarment in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations. Vance never faced criminal charges. The statute of limitations had run on most of what he'd done during Blue Harbor, and prosecutors said they couldn't prove he'd known about Jamie Winter's death in advance or had any direct involvement. But his reputation was destroyed. His decades on the bench were now viewed through the lens of corruption and bias. Hundreds of his rulings were being reviewed. Some would be overturned. He'd lost his pension, his legacy, everything he'd valued. I saw him once months after the hearing in a coffee shop. He looked diminished, shuffling, and uncertain. He saw me, opened his mouth as if to speak, then just turned and left without a word. With $35,000 from the inheritance, I established the Elena Foster Integrity Fund. It provided legal support to people facing judicial bias or corruption, helped fund investigations into systemic problems in the courts, and supported whistleblowers who exposed wrongdoing. Chloe ran it with me, handling the legal structure while I managed the day-to-day operations. Agent Raven served as an advisor, using her knowledge of government systems to identify cases that needed support. Major Monroe became our most effective fundraiser, speaking at veteran events about the importance of accountability, even within military and intelligence services. The first person the fund helped was a woman named Sarah Martinez. She came to my office 6 months after we'd launched, nervous and exhausted. Her story was painfully familiar. A custody case, a judge who seemed biased toward her ex-husband for no clear reason, delays that made no sense. I listened to every word, taking notes the way my mother had taught me through her example. When Sarah finished, I pulled out a fresh legal pad. Tell me every detail. We're going to document it all, and we're going to find the pattern because there's always a pattern. Sarah's case took months to resolve, but we did it. We documented the bias, filed for recusal, got a new judge, and won based on actual evidence, rather than whatever corrupt arrangement had been in place. When it was over, Sarah hugged me in the courthouse, crying with relief. "You gave me my life back," she said. "I thought I was alone. I thought no one would believe me." "I know the feeling," I told her. "But you're not alone. None of us are as long as we keep fighting." 1 year after the hearing, I drove to the cemetery where my mother was buried. It was a gray October afternoon, typical Portland weather. I'd brought yellow roses, the kind she'd planted around her garden. I settled on the grass beside her headstone, not caring that it was damp and cold. "Hi, Mom," I said softly. "I wanted to give you an update. The fund helped 18 families this year. We got 2 judges recused for bias, supported 5 whistleblowers, and funded investigations into 3 different court systems. Chloe says we're making a real difference. Major Monroe says you'd be proud." I traced the letters of her name on the stone. Elena Catherine Foster, 1968 to 2024. Beloved Mother. I'd added one more line when I'd had the stone made. Seeker of truth, protector of the innocent. Mom. I understand now why you stayed quiet for so long. You weren't being weak. You were being strategic. You documented everything, built an unshakable case, and waited for the right moment to deploy it. You taught me that justice isn't always immediate or obvious. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it requires sacrifice. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is document the truth and trust that someone will use it when the time is right. The wind picked up scattering leaves across the cemetery. I thought about Leonard and his reduced circumstances, about Vance and his disgrace, about all the people who'd thought they could escape consequences for their actions. Mom, you taught me that sometimes the most powerful words are the ones you save for the right moment. That justice isn't always about revealing everything right away. Sometimes it's about knowing exactly when and how to use the truth. You were a master strategist. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for trusting me to finish what you started. I stayed until the light began to fade, talking to her about the work I was doing, the people I was helping, the life I was building from the foundation she'd laid. Before I left, I placed the roses carefully at the base of her headstone. Sleep well, Mom. Your work continues. Your truth lives on, and I promise I'll keep fighting for people who can't fight for themselves, just like you wanted me to. Walking back to my car, I thought about the trunk that now sat in my living room, empty of secrets but full of memories. I'd kept it as a reminder of what my mother had done, the courage it took to document injustice while living alongside it, the strength required to wait 30 years for the right moment to reveal the truth. That trunk had been a time bomb, carefully constructed and patiently waiting. My mother had built it knowing she might never see it explode, but she'd trusted me to light the fuse when the moment came. I drove through Portland's darkening streets, heading not home but to my office. Another case file waited there, another person who needed someone to believe them and document their truth. The work never stopped. Systems of power and corruption constantly tried to hide their abuses, to silence whistleblowers, to make victims feel like they were alone and powerless. But they weren't alone, not anymore. My mother had taught me that one person carefully documenting the truth can bring down corrupt systems, that patience and preparation can triumph over power and connections, that mothers protect their children in ways we might not understand until we're ready to carry on the fight. Justice isn't always loud or immediate. Sometimes it's quiet and methodical, preserved in a leather journal and hidden under roses until the right person finds it at the right time. My mother knew that. She lived it. She bet everything on me finding her truth and having the courage to use it. And even though it took 30 years, even though she never got to see it, her gamble paid off. The truth came out. The corrupt faced consequences, and her legacy lived on, not just in the money she left me or the house or the trunk, but in the work I was doing every day to bring her kind of patient, documented, unshakable justice to others who needed it. I parked outside my office, grabbed my briefcase, and headed inside. The Elena Foster Integrity Fund's lights were on. Chloe was working late too, preparing another case. We had work to do, people to help, truth to document, justice to pursue. My mother's fight wasn't over. It had just passed to a new generation armed with her example and her evidence ready to continue the battle she'd started, and we were winning one carefully documented truth at a time. So here's what I want to know. If you found evidence that could destroy someone who'd hurt your family, but using it might put you in danger, what would you do? Would you stay silent to stay safe or risk everything for the truth? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand up to someone who seemed untouchable, hit that like button and subscribe. Because there are more stories like mine out there, more people fighting for justice against impossible odds, and they need to know they're not alone. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it gives someone else the courage to tell theirs.